Seattle rain doesn't really fall from the sky. It just lingers, suspended there, like it's waiting to judge you. That Tuesday night in October, the damp felt like it was soaking straight through the walls of our $3 million smart house, creeping into my bones while I lay awake at 1:15 a.m., flat on my back, staring at the ceiling like it might finally explain what the hell went wrong. My name's Liam Harrington. I spent 12 years in the Marines before I traded body armor for a desk job in corporate cybersecurity. And I'll tell you this, nothing I faced overseas prepared me for the kind of silence that settles between a husband and wife in the middle of the night. That quiet hits deeper than any combat zone I was ever dropped into. Ava was turned away from me, just like she'd been for the past 123 nights. Not that I was keeping track. Except I absolutely was, because that's how my mind works when something feels off and refuses to make sense. After 9 years of marriage, you get to know someone's breathing better than your own. I knew she wasn't asleep. Her shoulders were stiff, locked tight, like she was bracing for impact. And there it was, the soft blue glow of her phone reflecting off the silk pillowcase she'd insisted we needed. Apparently cotton was too basic now, beneath her evolved taste. She was on her phone late at night, pretending it was work-related. The old version of me, the guy I was 6 months ago, would have reached over. I would have asked what was wrong. Maybe tried to pull her closer, remind her how we used to fall asleep wrapped around each other, like letting go wasn't an option. But that guy was gone. Instead, I cleared my throat quietly, just loud enough to let her know I was awake, and said her name in that careful, measured tone husbands use when they don't want to trigger another problem in their own damn house. She didn't move. Didn't jump. Didn't even pretend to be surprised. She just sighed deep and heavy, like I'd asked her to solve world hunger instead of acknowledging I existed. I have an early meeting tomorrow, Liam. Please. Her voice had that sound to it. The kind that feels like a door being slammed in your face without anyone actually touching it. Cold. Sharp. Irritated. Like sharing a bed with me was an inconvenience she barely tolerated. This wasn't a rough patch. This wasn't the normal ups and downs people warn you about when you get married. This was 4 straight months of my wife acting like physical contact with me might give her a disease. 4 months of excuses that grew thinner every week until you could see right through them. 4 months of watching the woman I built my life with slowly turn into someone I didn't recognize, someone who just happened to share my last name and my address. Our bed used to be a safe place. Now it felt like a demilitarized zone, and she'd made it painfully clear which side I belonged on. I didn't argue. Didn't push. What was the point? I got up, left the bedroom without another word, and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. The house was dark, except for the soft glow of the smart lighting system I'd installed myself. I'm an engineer by nature. Engineers fix things. We optimize. We make systems work better. Turns out I couldn't fix whatever had broken between me and my wife. My eyes landed on the calendar stuck to the refrigerator, and something twisted hard in my chest. Tomorrow, technically today, since it was already past midnight, was the anniversary of our first date. 9 years earlier, I'd taken her to a tiny Italian place near the U District. Red checkered tablecloths. Candles melted into empty wine bottles. She laughed at everything I said and looked at me like I was the most interesting man in the room. The date wasn't circled. Which meant she'd either forgotten, or she didn't care. I couldn't decide which one hurt more. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat there in the dark kitchen, sipping water, listening to the rain, letting my brain do what it does best: analyze patterns and search for things that don't belong. That's the thing about working in cybersecurity. You start seeing life as interconnected systems. And when a system starts behaving differently than it should, we call that an indicator of compromise. My marriage? My entire home life? It was lighting up with more red flags than a communist parade. Morning came wrapped in that gray Seattle light that makes everything look dull and distant, like it's being viewed through a dirty window. I watched Ava get ready for work with the same detached focus I'd use reviewing surveillance footage. She spent 45 minutes picking out an outfit, 20 minutes longer than usual. And she was humming. actually humming. Like someone who had something to look forward to. And I knew, without asking, that whatever she was excited about wasn't me, and definitely wasn't our forgotten anniversary. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop, and she practically lunged for it. Her sudden change in posture revealed her true focus was elsewhere. "Client from the Tokyo office?" I asked, keeping my voice flat as I took a sip of coffee. "Must be rough with the time difference." She looked up at me with those green eyes I used to love. Now they just felt sharp. Calculating. She smiled, but it was the kind of professional smile that never made it past her lips. "You know how it is," she said. "Global business never sleeps." What I knew was that North Peak Energy had shut down their Tokyo office 6 weeks earlier during restructuring. What I also knew was that my wife had just lied straight to my face without hesitation. And what I knew most of all was this. The woman standing in front of me, dressed in designer clothes and expensive heels, wasn't the woman I married. Her behavior had changed completely, dishonest, distant, and secretive. After Ava pulled out of the driveway in the BMW she'd insisted we needed, because apparently her old Lexus was too humiliating to park in the North Peak garage, I sat down at my home office desk and did what I'm trained to do. I went to work. I'm the head of cybersecurity at North Peak Energy. That title comes with access most people don't even realize exists. More importantly, it comes with the ability to uncover things people are convinced they've buried for good. Some guys in my position would have confronted their wives right away. Yelling. Accusations. Maybe throwing a glass or two just to feel like they were doing something. But I wasn't just some guy. I was a former Marine who'd spent 12 years learning one simple rule that applies everywhere: combat zones, boardrooms, marriages falling apart. You gather intelligence first. And you never show your hand until you're ready to act. The first stop was Ava's company phone. I had full, legitimate access as the security administrator, so there was nothing sneaky about pulling the GPS data. On the surface, everything looked clean. According to the official logs, her phone bounced between the office and our house, exactly where a hard-working marketing director's phone was supposed to be. But phones are noisy little machines. They leave footprints in places most people never think to check. When I dug into the deeper network logs, a different picture started forming. Her phone had been lighting up cell towers in Bellevue far more often than her calendar could explain. Not just anywhere in Bellevue either, specifically near a boutique hotel called the Silver Bay. The Silver Bay wasn't known for conferences or corporate discounts. It was known for privacy. The kind executives paid for when discretion mattered more than a company rate. Then there was the car. About 40 extra miles showing up on the odometer every week. Miles she couldn't account for. Then the receipts. Restaurants that specialized in oysters and champagne. That one almost made me laugh. Ava had always claimed she hated oysters. Said they reminded her of snot. Apparently, she'd either developed a sudden taste for them, or someone else had been doing the ordering. Piece by piece, the puzzle locked together with a precision I didn't want but couldn't stop. The sudden devotion to the gym. The new perfume, expensive, sterile, like something you'd find in a 5-star hotel bathroom. The way she'd stopped using my nickname and switched to my full name, like we were co-workers instead of husband and wife. The upgraded wardrobe. The late nights. The business trips that didn't line up with her actual schedule. Every detail was another data point. I didn't want to solve the equation. But solving equations is what I do. The truth doesn't care if it hurts. It doesn't slow down just because it's about to tear you apart. That night, I stayed late at the office. That wasn't unusual. I did it all the time, and nobody questioned it. The server room hummed steadily, the sound almost calming, like white noise trying and failing to quiet my mind. Bathed in the blue glow of multiple monitors, I pulled up the corporate phone communication logs. As head of security, I had access to metadata for compliance and emergency purposes. What I found made my blood run cold in a way combat never had. She was messaging someone who seemed like HR, but the number actually belonged to a colleague she shouldn't have been contacting. Abe Kensington was a predator in a tailored suit. The kind of executive who wore watches worth more than most people's cars. He laughed too loud, talked too smooth, and made everyone around him feel like they were auditioning for his approval. He was also married. 3 kids. A wife who did charity work and smiled at company events like she hadn't quite realized what she'd signed up for. I opened their message history. As I scrolled through months of texts, something inside me shifted to slow, deep, irreversible. Like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface. At first, the messages were clean. Professional. Marketing budgets. Quarterly projections. Then, predictably, they changed. Inside jokes. Late-night conversations. Casual familiarity that had nothing to do with spreadsheets. Working dinners that clearly involved a lot more than work. One message from 3 weeks earlier hit harder than the rest. My wife, the woman I'd built my life around, had written. The old fool Whitman won't notice a thing. We can push another 50,000 by the end of the quarter. Nate's reply came minutes later. He asked about the soldier boy at home. Her response made my hands go numb. She said I was harmless. A nobody. Someone who'd be out of her life as soon as the bonuses hit. Harmless. Nobody. There it was. Clear as day. Black and white. The truth about how the woman I loved for nearly a decade actually saw me. Not as her husband. Not as her partner. Not even as a problem worth respecting. Just a placeholder. Something temporary. A warm body waiting at home while she built her real life with someone else. I stayed in that server room for a long time after that. Just breathing. Letting the information settle, reorganize, turn into something I could use. The younger version of me, the man I used to be before combat taught me what emotions can cost, might have driven straight home. Might have screamed. Broken things. Demanded answers that wouldn't change a damn thing. But that man was gone. I understood, with brutal clarity, that my wife was already lost to me. Replaced by someone who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. And once that realization locked into place, there was only one question left. Not if something was going to happen, but how I was going to handle what came next. Here's what Ava and her boyfriend never understood about me. Truth is, most people in my life missed it too. The calm guy. The quiet one. The man who showed up every day, did his job, didn't stir up drama. The husband who didn't raise his voice, didn't make scenes, didn't push back when his wife handed him excuse after excuse. That wasn't weakness. That was discipline. It was the same discipline that kept me alive in places where losing your temper got people killed. The same self-control that let me function when everything around me was chaos and fear. And now, that discipline had a new purpose. I wasn't going to snap. I wasn't going to break down. And I sure as hell wasn't going to give Ava or Nate the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. I was going to wait. I was going to observe. And I was going to collect evidence. When the time came, I would dismantle the world they'd built together with the same careful, methodical precision I'd used to take down a hostile network one node at a time. The weeks that followed were an exercise in controlled deception. On the outside, I played the role of the clueless husband. On the inside, I logged everything, every lie, every inconsistency, every digital footprint that told the rail story. I bought Ava flowers for our anniversary. Watched her paste on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Listened to her explain how exhausted she was, how work had drained her. I noticed how she checked her phone roughly 30 seconds after walking away from me. I told her I understood. Said work was stressful. Suggested we celebrate later, when things calmed down. The relief in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't seen me as a threat in a long time. If she ever had. One dinner from that stretch stands out with painful clarity. One of those nights that should have been ordinary but felt like watching a play where everyone else forgot their lines, except me. Ava came home late again, blaming a marathon meeting with the European team. I made pasta from scratch because cooking had always been my way of showing love, and old habits don't die easily. She barely looked at the plate when she sat down. Her attention stayed glued to her phone, not the food I'd spent hours making, food she used to ask for by name. "This is nice," she said, without a trace of sincerity, pushing the linguine around like a kid hiding vegetables. "You didn't have to go through all that trouble." "It's not trouble," I said, watching her face, hoping, stupidly, for some sign of guilt or recognition. There was nothing. Just impatience dressed up as fatigue. She ate almost none of it. Then excused herself for a conference call that lasted 2 hours. From behind the closed door of our home office, I heard muffled laughter that had nothing to do with work. I cleaned the kitchen alone. Packed the leftovers into containers she'd never open. Sat at the counter wondering when my marriage had turned into a performance I was expected to attend but never actually participate in. The next morning, I found a receipt in her coat pocket. She must have forgotten to throw it away. Dinner for 2 at a restaurant I'd never heard of. Champagne. Oysters. Dessert. The kind of bill that screams celebration, not business. The date printed at the top made my stomach drop. It was our anniversary. She hadn't just forgotten it. She'd made a choice. She'd spend it with someone else while I sat at home, watching the clock, telling myself that sometimes work really is that demanding. After that, I went deeper. I followed the money. Ava and Nate had been sloppy. They'd set up a shell company, a fake marketing consultancy that existed only on paper. For 18 months, they'd been pushing inflated invoices through North Peak's advertising budget. By corporate standards, the amounts didn't raise immediate alarms. But added together, it came out to $2.5 million. Fake campaigns. Ghost vendors. Creative accounting that would make a forensic auditor cry. The part that almost made me laugh was how they did it. They used company systems. They left digital fingerprints everywhere. Like amateurs who thought they were masterminds. But it got worse. Of course it did. As I kept digging, I realized Ava hadn't just been stealing and sleeping with her boss. She'd been clearing her path to the top by destroying other people along the way. Internal emails showed her feeding Nate confidential information about other VP candidates. Handing him exactly what he needed to sabotage projects, undermine reputations, and make good people look incompetent in front of George Whitman. Careers were ruined. People who worked hard, played fair, and trusted the system burned so my wife could chase a corner office. George Whitman was old money and old school. A self-made billionaire who'd built North Peak from a single gas station in Montana into a regional energy empire through grit and an almost religious devotion to integrity. He still answered his own phone sometimes. Still remembered employees he'd met once at a picnic years ago. And he took betrayal personally. Very personally. So as I compiled the evidence, I knew exactly who needed to see it. The meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon in his corner office on the 40th floor. Seattle spread out beneath us, gray and sprawling, like a map of everything he'd built. I walked in carrying a black folder. Inside were printouts of every email. Every transaction. Every lie. I placed it on his desk without ceremony. George looked at me for a long moment, then at the folder. "What's this, Harrington?" he asked without lifting his eyes from the laptop. "You requesting time off or something?" "No, sir," I said, keeping my tone flat and professional. "This is an internal security audit. Potential financial irregularities. About $2.5 million in fraudulent transactions over the past 18 months. That did it." He slowly closed the laptop and finally looked at me. George Whitman's gray eyes had a reputation. They'd made seasoned executives sweat through custom suits. At 63, he still looked like a man who could hold his own in a bar fight, and there was a reason nobody crossed him twice. "Go on," he said. I briefed him the same way I would have briefed a commanding officer. Clean. Direct. No emotion. Every claim backed by documentation. The shell company. The inflated invoices. The paper trail that ran straight to Oliver Kensington's personal accounts and from there into a shared fund Ava had access to. I showed him the emails. Casual, almost lazy. Like they were planning a weekend getaway instead of committing large-scale corporate fraud. I showed him proof they'd deliberately sabotaged other executives to clear Ava's path upward. And yes, I showed him the hotel footage. Not for sympathy. For clarity. It established the nature of their relationship and the depth of their cooperation in a way spreadsheets never could. I'd accessed it through legitimate security channels. Technically within my authority, even if it wasn't something I'd ever imagined needing to look for. George went through the folder one page at a time. His expression hardened with each document. When he finally looked up, I recognized the look immediately. I'd seen it before. The face of a man who felt personally insulted and was deciding how to respond. "Your wife," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," I replied. "Still legally." "That'll be changing." He studied me in silence. I knew what he was looking for: anger, desperation, anything that suggested this was personal revenge instead of a legitimate threat to the company. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "They played this all wrong," he said. "Went after a man who knows how to fight without making noise." He closed the folder and rested his hand on top of it, like sealing a vow. "The charity gala is Friday," he said. "We're going to make an example. One nobody in this industry forgets." The next day felt like limbo. I went through the motions of my life knowing everything was about to change. I went home. Ate dinner with Ava. Listened as she talked about her day, fully aware that nearly every word was either a lie or a carefully placed distraction. She mentioned the gala. Said Nate had hinted there might be a big announcement. She looked genuinely excited, almost glowing. Like she was waiting for a crown to be placed on her head. "You'll try to look presentable, won't you?" she said, straightening my collar with fingers that felt unfamiliar. "This is important for my career." "Wouldn't dream of embarrassing you," I said. And I meant it in ways she couldn't possibly understand. Friday arrived with that rare, sharp autumn clarity Seattle sometimes offers as an apology for all the rain. Ava spent the entire day preparing like she was walking into her own wedding. Hair salon. Nail salon. Makeup artist. The full production. When she finally stepped out in a $3,000 dress, paid for with money she'd stolen from the company she pretended to serve, she looked like a magazine cover. And about as warm. I watched her admire herself in the mirror for 20 straight minutes. Adjusting angles. Studying reflections. Memorizing what she thought perfection looked like. The vanity had always been there. It just used to be softened by warmth. By moments where she'd catch me watching and laugh at herself. Now there was none of that. Just evaluation. Like she was assessing a product before launch. "Emeralds or diamonds?" she asked, holding each up in turn. Not once looking at me. "The emeralds bring out your eyes," I said automatically. A response I'd given 1,000 times over 9 years. She ignored it completely and chose the diamonds. "They're worth more," she said to her reflection, as if value was the only language that mattered. We drove separately. She said she might stay late for networking and didn't want me to feel obligated to wait. The real reason was obvious: she wanted the option to leave with Nate without explanations. I accepted the excuse the same way I'd accepted everything lately. Calm. Agreeable. Letting her believe I was the oblivious husband she thought she'd married. Letting her believe right up until the end that she was the smartest person in every room. The limo ride to the Grand Aurora Hotel was quiet. Ava texted Nate the entire way. I watched the city lights slide past the window and emptied my mind. She didn't notice my silence. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, it worked for me. The man sitting beside her wasn't the weak husband she dismissed. He wasn't the harmless nobody she'd written off. He was something else now. Something she'd helped create with her lies, her greed, and her absolute certainty that I was never going to be a threat. I caught our reflection in the tinted glass. Two people dressed for the same event. Sitting inches apart. Separated by a distance that had nothing to do with space. And I thought about all the times I'd ridden in vehicles headed toward situations where the ending was unclear and the chances of survival weren't great. This felt different, but also strangely familiar. That same calm before impact. The quiet certainty that something big was coming and that I'd done everything possible to prepare for it. The ballroom at the Grand Aurora was exactly what you'd expect from a high-end corporate charity gala. Crystal chandeliers. Ice sculptures. Servers gliding through the crowd with trays of champagne that probably cost more per bottle than some people earn in a week. The room was packed with investors, board members, and executives who all spoke that polished dialect of people who've never had to wonder how rent was getting paid. The moment we stepped inside, Ava changed. She became the perfect corporate wife, graceful, charming, completely at home among predators. I spotted Nate immediately, standing near the stage with that confident, predatory smile he wore like armor. Custom suit. $7,000 watch. Every inch the untouchable executive. He caught Ava's eye and gave her a subtle nod. To anyone else, it probably meant nothing. She answered with a slight adjustment of her hair. Might as well have been a secret handshake. They really thought they were clever. Thought they were subtle. But to anyone paying attention, anyone with a reason to look, it was painfully obvious. I spent the cocktail hour making polite conversation with mid-level managers who seemed faintly surprised that the cybersecurity director could talk about anything besides firewalls and encryption. One of them, a woman from accounting named Sophie, struck me as sharper than her title suggested. She watched Ava work the room like a seasoned politician and said, carefully, "Your wife seems to be doing well." "She certainly makes an impression," I replied, keeping my voice even. Sophie studied my face for half a second longer than necessary. The look she gave me said she understood exactly what I wasn't saying. Dinner was an elaborate, multi-course affair with wine pairings only people with expense accounts ever order. I was seated with board members who spent most of the meal comparing golf handicaps and arguing about real estate in Maui. Ava sat closer to the stage, flanked by Nate and two other executives who leaned toward her like she was dispensing insight instead of pure charm. She looked at me once during the entire meal. Just a quick glance. A check-in. Making sure I was still where I belonged. Then her attention snapped right back to her real audience. The night moved along with the usual corporate pageantry. Speeches about community involvement. Charitable impact. North Peak's unwavering commitment to excellence. Ava floated from group to group, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, placing herself closer and closer to the stage without making it obvious. She barely acknowledged me, except to occasionally redirect me away from conversations she decided were above my pay grade. Around 9 o'clock, George Whitman stepped onto the stage. The room quieted instantly. The kind of silence powerful men don't have to ask for. He looked every bit the company patriarch in his tuxedo, composed, confident, untouchable. When he smiled, nothing about his expression hinted that the night was about to go off script. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly, "tonight we're here to talk about transparency and the future of our company." Ava elbowed me lightly, excitement radiating off her. "This is it," she whispered. "He's announcing the restructuring." I didn't answer. I watched George gesture toward the AV technician. The massive screen behind him flickered to life. Ava stiffened beside me. I could almost feel what she was expecting, her name, her face, bold letters confirming the promotion she'd stolen and schemed for. Instead, a text message appeared. Ava's color drained so fast I thought she might collapse. Across the room, I saw Nate Kensington freeze mid-smile as his own words filled a screen the size of a small car, projected in front of 400 of the most powerful people in Seattle's business world. "That old fool Whitman won't notice a thing. We can push through another 50,000 by the end of the quarter. What about the soldier boy at home? Liam? He's harmless. A nobody who'll be out of my life as soon as the bonus hits." The silence in that ballroom became so complete you could actually hear the ice cracking in the champagne buckets. Then George's voice sliced through it. "These messages," he said, almost casually, "were exchanged between my chief financial officer and my director of marketing over the past several months." The room stayed frozen. "They document a scheme that defrauded this company of more than $2 million, he continued, "and deliberately destroyed the careers of several talented executives whose only mistake was standing in the way." The screen shifted. Financial records. Transaction logs. Charts and timelines. A clean, undeniable paper trail laid out in brutal detail. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, the kind of sound you hear right before something breaks. Someone dropped a champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor, sharp and loud, like a starting gun. Then the video started. Hotel footage showed Ava and Nate together in the lobby, looking very close, and entering the same elevator. The footage was discreet enough to avoid scandal headlines, but explicit enough that no one in that room could pretend they didn't understand exactly what they were watching. Nate tried to bolt. He didn't make it 3 steps. 2 security guards appeared in front of him like they'd been summoned on cue, which they had. I'd personally briefed them earlier. His expression shifted from confident predator to pale panic in about 3 seconds. Watching him realize his world was collapsing in real time almost made the last 4 months worth it. Almost. Ava grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug in hard enough to hurt. Her voice came out in a desperate whisper that carried anyway in the stunned silence. "Liam, do something. This is a mistake. These are fake. It's a setup." I turned and looked at her. Really looked. Past the makeup. Past the dress. Past the version of herself she sold to the world. I saw the woman who'd called me harmless. A nobody. The woman who lied to my face for months. Who stole without hesitation. Who burned people's lives down to get what she wanted. And I felt nothing. Just a calm, icy clarity. "I'm the head of cybersecurity, Ava," I said, making sure my voice carried to the people watching us like this was live theater. "I verified every file personally. Every single one is authentic." I reached down and gently, deliberately removed her hand from my sleeve, the way you'd brush lint off a jacket. The look on her face when it finally clicked, when she understood my role in all of this, was something I'll carry with me forever. Not satisfaction. Something heavier. The knowledge that some moments can't be undone. George's voice came through the speakers again. Formal. Final. Ava Harrington and Oliver Kensington are hereby terminated for cause, effective immediately. A beat. Their involvement in corporate fraud and ethics violations has been reported to the appropriate authorities, who are waiting in the lobby to continue this discussion. Camera flashes exploded across the room. A storm of light. Every journalist there realized they'd just been handed the kind of story that builds careers. Ava stood frozen at the center of it all, her carefully curated image disintegrating in real time. Across the room, Nate was escorted out by security with a grip that made it clear resistance wouldn't be wise. Ava turned to me one last time. I watched the emotion cycle across her face, shock, then fury, then something close to fear, as she finally understood just how badly she'd misjudged me. "You did this," she said. It wasn't a question. "You did this." "You did it," I replied. "I just documented it." The crowd parted as I walked toward the exit. I didn't look back. Behind me, Ava's voice rose as the police approached, excuses, accusations, desperation, but it all blurred into background noise as I stepped outside into the cool Seattle night. I took the first full breath I'd had in months. The next 48 hours were a controlled demolition. I watched from a distance. Nate made bail quickly. His first move was to throw Ava under the bus so thoroughly that their former partnership became a punchline in corporate circles. According to his statement, he'd been seduced, manipulated, coerced by a woman who'd compromised his judgment. Exactly the kind of spin I expected from a man who'd never taken responsibility for anything in his life. The media coverage was relentless. Every detail dissected. Repeated. Debated until nothing remained but opinions and hot takes. Someone leaked Ava's corporate headshot. Her face was suddenly everywhere. The ambitious executive who betrayed her company. Her husband. Anyone who stood in her way. The comments sections were vicious. Equal parts outrage and satisfaction. I skimmed them once and never went back. Her former colleagues, people who'd smiled in meetings, praised her work, accepted her help, turned on her with a special kind of venom. The same executives who once applauded her drive were now claiming they'd always sensed something wrong. Too ambitious. Too calculating. Too willing to do whatever it took. It was corporate revisionism at its finest. Everyone rushed to rewrite their proximity to the disaster, distancing themselves from failure while quietly taking credit for whatever success had happened nearby. By the time Ava left the gala, her company credit cards were already dead. Her accounts had been frozen as part of the investigation. Her company vehicle was flagged for immediate repossession. By morning, her face was splashed across every local news outlet, and not in the way she'd always imagined. The driven executive who'd clawed her way toward the corner office had become a cautionary example. The kind HR departments would reference during ethics training with a carefully neutral tone. My phone lit up non-stop. Reporters fishing for quotes. Attorneys asking for depositions. Former colleagues calling under the guise of concern, hoping for gossip. I ignored nearly all of it. This wasn't a story I needed to spin or control. The facts were already locked in place, sealed inside evidence folders, court filings, and internal memos that would be dissected in business ethics courses for years. That night, she tried to come home. She stood outside the front gate in the rain, soaked and small, like a scene ripped from a movie, except this wasn't a romantic comedy, and there was no reconciliation waiting in the final act. The access code no longer worked. I changed it earlier that day, right after meeting with a divorce attorney who specialized in asset protection in cases involving spousal fraud. Her belongings were stacked near the gate in cardboard boxes that were already sagging under the Seattle drizzle. Designer dresses. Expensive shoes. Physical proof of a life built on stolen money and shattered trust. I watched through the security feed. I watched her pound on the gate, then on the front door. I watched mascara bleed down her cheeks in dark streaks as rain stripped away the polish, reducing her from corporate predator to something raw and desperate. Once, seeing her like that would have destroyed me. I would have run outside without hesitation, wrapped her in my arms, forgiven everything. That version of me disappeared somewhere between reading those messages and listening to her lie to my face every day without hesitation. She stayed there nearly an hour, pounding, slumping, pacing. I found myself wondering what was going through her head. Whether she felt genuine regret or only the panic of consequences. Whether she understood the difference. The rain kept falling, indifferent in the way life tends to be when someone finally exhausts their supply of second chances. Eventually, she pulled out her phone. Probably calling friends who would soon realize that being associated with her was now a liability. When I finally opened the door, I stayed inside. The rain had intensified. Ava looked wrecked, designer clothes ruined, makeup completely destroyed, hair plastered flat against her head. She lunged forward the instant she saw me. "Liam, please," she said, her voice breaking as she reached for me, hands trembling from cold or fear, or both. "You have to help me. This is a misunderstanding. We can explain everything. Just give me a chance." "There is no we, Ava," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar to me, flat, distant, like I was commenting on the weather. "There hasn't been a we for a long time. You made that clear in your messages." "They were taken out of context," she said quickly. I was venting. "I didn't mean any of it. You know how stressful work's been." What struck me most wasn't her fear. It was that she was still lying. Still manipulating. Still treating me like the harmless nobody she'd described in those texts. Even now, with her life collapsing around her, she couldn't tell the truth without trimming it, reshaping it, shifting the blame. Some people never learn. They keep using the same lies, convinced the ones that ruined them will somehow save them. I handed her the divorce papers, keeping the tone calm and factual. Her breath caught. The legal documents set clear boundaries for her distance from my home and work. I paused. The house was purchased entirely with my income and inheritance. You'll take your personal belongings. Nothing else. Her expression twisted, the pleasant mask finally cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. You think you can just throw me away after everything I've done for this marriage? I almost laughed. Almost let the sheer absurdity knock me off balance. Instead, I held on to the calm that had carried me through worse situations than this. What exactly have you done for this marriage, Ava? I asked quietly. Sleep with your boss? Steal from the company? Call me harmless? Plan to leave once your bonus is cleared? I shook my head. You didn't treat this marriage like something worth protecting. You treated it like a business expense. And now you're learning that some costs aren't recoverable. You're making a mistake, she hissed. The warmth was gone now. What remained was venom. I'll destroy you in court. I'll take everything you have. You're welcome to try, I said, and I meant it. But I'd suggest reading those papers carefully before you make any decisions. My attorney has a very detailed picture of your finances, I added calmly. That includes a few transactions law enforcement may find interesting, assuming they haven't already. Whatever fight she had left drained out of her instantly. It was like watching the air leak from a balloon. She sagged against the doorframe, clutching the envelope to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The woman standing there barely resembled the polished executive she'd worked so hard to become. And to my own surprise, I felt something close to pity, not because she didn't deserve the fallout, but because I was witnessing someone finally collide with the consequences of her choices and realize, far too late, that she'd bet everything on a losing hand. Where am I supposed to go? She asked. Her voice was small now. Stripped down to fear. That's not my problem anymore, I said, and I closed the door. The lock clicked into place with a finality that sounded like the end of a chapter, because it was. I stood alone in the foyer, listening to the rain and the fading sound of Ava walking away. I waited for triumph. For vindication. For at least a flicker of satisfaction. None of it came. What I felt instead was a strange hollowness, the kind that hits when you've carried a heavy burden for so long that setting it down leaves you lighter, but also oddly unfinished. I went into the living room and poured myself a whiskey. The good bottle. The one I'd been saving for a special occasion without ever deciding what counted. The first sip burned in a good way. I settled into my favorite chair, watched the rain streak down the windows, and let my thoughts quiet for the first time in months. There was still plenty ahead, lawyers, filings, months of legal cleanup, but that was future Liam's problem. Present Liam had done what needed doing. And now present Liam was going to sit in the silence and notice that it no longer felt suffocating. The house felt different. Or maybe I did. Probably both. Ava's presence was still everywhere, her furniture choices, her decor, the way rooms had been arranged around her preferences, but it all felt like relics now. Artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. I'd change things eventually. Make the place mine in ways I never had when I was trying to accommodate someone who'd never planned on staying. The weeks that followed were a parade of depositions, hearings, and paperwork so tedious it made me appreciate the efficiency of explosions by comparison. Ava's attorney tried everything, painting her as a victim of corporate pressure, a woman controlled by a cold husband, and about a dozen other narratives that might have worked if there hadn't been a mountain of evidence saying otherwise. When investigators uncovered offshore accounts, the fraud case escalated to federal charges. At that point, the divorce was the least of her problems. I testified twice, once for the divorce and once for the federal case. Both times, I stuck to short, factual answers. I refused to speculate about Ava's emotions or motives. Her legal team tried to frame me as a bitter husband who'd fabricated evidence out of spite. The problem was that the forensic accountants confirmed everything I'd found, and more. By the end of the first week, even her lawyers seemed like they were just checking boxes. The hardest part wasn't the legal mess. or the media attention, or even the occasional confrontation with someone who'd bought into Ava's victim story. The hardest part was the quiet. Coming home to an empty house. Reaching for my phone out of habit, ready to share something small about my day, then remembering the person I'd done that with for nearly 10 years was gone. Not dead. Just gone. Replaced by someone I didn't recognize and wouldn't want to, even if I could. Nate Kensington took a plea deal that came with serious prison time and financial penalties big enough to erase most of what he'd stolen. His cooperation ensured Ava couldn't pretend she didn't know how deep the scheme went. His wife filed for divorce within a week. Through corporate back channels, I heard she sold their Medina house and moved back to Connecticut with the kids. Another family shattered by ambition. Another reminder of what happens when people convince themselves the rules don't apply. About 6 months later, I ran into her, Nate's ex-wife, at the coffee shop near my office. She recognized me first. That made sense. My face had been in the news almost as often as her husband's. She stopped at my table, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Liam Caldwell," she said. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Kensington," I replied, unsure what else fit. "Please, call me Margaret," she said gently. "I think we're past formalities." After a brief hesitation, she asked if she could sit. We talked for about 20 minutes. Two people standing in the wreckage of the same explosion, comparing notes on rebuilding. She was doing better than I'd expected. Reconnected with family. Old friends. Slowly putting together a life that didn't revolve around her husband's approval or his career or his lies. Before she left, she thanked me. I hadn't expected that. "It was worse not knowing," she said, stirring a coffee she barely touched. "Suspecting something but never being sure. At least now I understand what I was dealing with." I told her I was glad she was doing okay, and I meant it. After she left, I stayed at that table for a long while, thinking about all the lives that had brushed up against Ava and Nate's scheme. The co-workers, the families, the careers, collateral damage caused by two people who'd convinced themselves the outcome mattered more than the wreckage they left behind. About a month after the gala, George Whitman asked me to come by his office. I went in expecting one of two things, either a promotion or a serious talk about the amount of confidential material I'd accessed during my investigation. What I didn't expect was a firm handshake and an offer. He was launching a new security consulting firm under the North Peak umbrella and wanted me as a partner. "You handled this like a professional," he said, studying me with those sharp gray eyes he used in negotiations. "No theatrics. No unnecessary spectacle. Just clean, disciplined execution." Then he added, "I need people like that." I told him I'd need time to think it over. My old life had been flattened, and I wasn't ready to rush into building the next one without understanding what I actually wanted. The money was solid. The opportunity was real. But I wasn't sure I wanted to spend the rest of my career digging through other people's betrayals. That kind of work leaves marks. It erodes trust. And I'd already paid more than enough of that price. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in April, 6 months after the night I first noticed Ava texting in bed. Once the financial crimes were officially part of the record, the judge moved quickly. Ava's attempt to claim half of everything collapsed under the weight of her own documented plans to leave me once the bonuses cleared. She walked away with her personal belongings and a mountain of legal debt. I walked out of that courthouse feeling something I hadn't felt in years, a clean, uncomplicated freedom. The kind that comes from realizing something heavy has been crushing you, even if you didn't recognize the weight while you were carrying it. I eventually accepted George's offer, but not right away. I took a few months for therapy, reflection, and figuring out who Liam Harrington was when he wasn't playing the role of loyal husband to someone who'd never earned that loyalty. The work now is demanding, and sometimes it's dark. But it also means companies get warning instead of surprise. Employees keep their careers. Families don't get blindsided by predators who think they're untouchable. That matters to me. Ava tried to reach out about a year later through an intermediary. The restraining order was still in place. She said she wanted to apologize. Or find closure. Or maybe just hear something that would make living with her choices easier. I never replied. Not because I was angry. That fire burned out a long time ago, leaving behind something quieter and more settled. I didn't respond because there was nothing left to say. She made her decisions. I made mine. The consequences followed, exactly as they should have. Going back over it would have been like picking at a scar that had finally healed. The last I heard, she was working at a small marketing firm in Arizona, rebuilding from the ground up with whatever was left of her reputation. A small part of me hopes she finds stability, not for her sake, exactly, but because people can change, and second chances matter. That part of me is very quiet. It doesn't keep me awake at night. These days, I sleep well. The bed doesn't feel empty anymore. It just feels like a bed, something meant for rest, not conflict. I've started dating again. Slowly. Carefully. I probably pay more attention to red flags than most people, but that vigilance has kept me from repeating old mistakes. The woman I'm seeing now is a veterinarian. She has laugh lines at the corners of her eyes and absolutely no ability to lie convincingly about anything. Sometimes I catch myself being surprised by how easy things can be when both people are actually trying. The house has changed too. New furniture. Fresh paint. Enough differences that it no longer feels like a shrine to a failed marriage. I kept a few practical items that were mine before Ava and stayed mine after, but most of what we built together is gone now. Donated. Sold. Or simply thrown away. Starting over at 41 wasn't part of the plan, but then again, very little over the past year had gone according to plan. I've learned to be okay with that. Sometimes I think about that night in the ballroom, the moment everything changed, and I try to pinpoint what I felt as I watched Ava's carefully built world crumble. The truth is, I don't remember triumph, or vengeance, or even a particularly strong sense of satisfaction. What I remember is exhaustion, the bone-deep tiredness of finally being done with a battle I never wanted to fight. She'd turned our marriage into a war, and I'd survived it. Winning felt less like victory and more like walking away from a wreck I hadn't been driving. The point of telling this story isn't to make myself look good, or to paint Ava as a villain, though she certainly wasn't the hero in our narrative. The point is that people show you who they are in small ways long before the big, undeniable revelations arrive. The real failure of my marriage wasn't the affair, or the fraud, or even the public humiliation at the gala. The real failure was years of small dismissals, subtle disrespects, and quiet betrayals that I chose to ignore because acknowledging them would have meant admitting that something was fundamentally wrong. By the time she started calling me harmless in her texts, she'd been treating me that way for years. And I'd let her, because it was easier than confronting a truth I wasn't ready to face. That's the lesson I carry forward now into this new chapter: pay attention to the small things. Trust your instincts when they whisper that something is off. Never let someone convince you that your peace of mind is less important than their convenience. The rain is falling again tonight, the same Seattle rain that seems eternal, and I sit in my living room with a glass of whiskey, with absolutely nothing to prove to anyone. The silence in this house isn't empty anymore. It's just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed, after everything that needed to be washed away finally is. Tomorrow will bring work, challenges, and all the complications of living a real life in a world that doesn't care much about your comfort. But tonight, right now, there is just this: a man in his own space, at peace with his choices, looking forward to whatever comes next without fear, without obligation, without the weight of someone else's deceit. And honestly, after everything, that is more than enough.